Elden Ring Nightreign is very disappointing in my opinion. I don't know about Nightreign, kinda underwhelmed. A disappointed perspective on Elden Ring Nightreign. Asset flip worth $40? As a Souls-like and roguelike fan, Nightreign left me conflicted. I'm still conflicted about Elden Ring Nightreign. When Elden Ring Nightreign was first announced, it very quickly captured the imagination of fans. Buzz was generated instantaneously, and in no small part due to the colossal success of its namesake. Elden Ring is a triumph of modern gaming, an instant classic that brought new fans to the shores of FromSoftware and impressed existing fans for innovating and elevating the existing formula of their star-studded lineup of incredible games. So why in the following weeks and months did Elden Ring Nightreign lose such momentum before its release? For the uninitiated, Elden Ring Nightreign is a spin-off IP from the successful 2022 open-world RPG Elden Ring that is releasing on the 30th of May 2025 for a healthy $40 USD price tag or $50 for the deluxe version. Described by the publisher Bandai Namco as a 3-player co-op action survival game previews and early reviews from the network test undertaken in February of 2025 highlighted the very heavy influence of the roguelite genre on the game's design. So let's break down a few of the details that we've learned since. The game is set in Limveld, an island in the lands between, with many of the same enemies, bosses, and locations and items from the original game. A cast of bosses would rather confusingly be returning from the Dark Souls series, an IP separate from the Elden Ring universe, allegedly. When asked, the game's director simply said he included these bosses, and I quote, "I thought it'd be kind of fun." Network testers reported that the roguelite elements of the games were underbaked, although this was a network test, so many of the game's assets were reportedly lifted and shifted entirely in their original state, placed now in a new location with no noticeable adjustments. Leveling is reduced simply to hitting a button rather than highly customizable build crafting that FromSoft games are used to, and this is just a short list of reasons that fans were starting to question their own excitement for the game. However, it did lead to some absolutely spectacular memes. Elden Ring Nightreign, or Demons Darkborn Ring 2 Shadow of the Ashes of the Ringed Crown of the Old Hunter Die Twice Remastered. He didn't hear no f***ing bell. Nameless King in Elden Ring. What the hell is a polar bear doing in Arlington, Texas? Nightreign looks good. It looks cheap and doesn't feel like a Souls game. It's the same price as a DLC and innovates on the Souls genre. It's not directed by Miyazaki. He wants to let other directors at FromSoft execute their vision. For some fans, there was just something kind of off about Elden Ring Nightreign. Perhaps the lofty heights of FromSoftware's success had set high expectations for the fan base, and a game that was openly flipping assets just wasn't hitting the right notes. For fans, the glimmer of a new FromSoft game was starting to fade, and questions were piling up as the penny dropped that maybe Elden Ring Nightreign wasn't going to take its seat at the table with all of FromSoft's prior masterpieces. Let's travel back a few months to February 14th of 2025. A wide audience of games media and content creators were invited to participate in a network test for Nightreign. The version of the game that they'd been playing was limited to a few playable characters, events and bosses, but the core elements of the game would be represented. There was a spectrum of opinions that came from this event. In the US, the event was plagued with server crashes and may have soured participants' opinions as a result. However, the overarching perception was that people were generally kind of whelmed. It was Elden Ring's combat experience and visual representation, but with a core gameplay loop entirely changed. A 3-day cycle where gamers were placed in the world and forced to rapidly defeat enemies, level and loot gear in order to defeat a night boss at the end of each day, and a night lord on the 3rd day. The roguelite elements of the cycle weren't fully fleshed out, with the meta progression systems mostly hidden for the test. Traversal was adjusted, no torrent to ride, but enhanced sprinting was present, Fortnite gliding with birds and parkour introduced to increase the pace of the game. Speaking of Fortnite,
very well. Say it again. Hawk Tour.
Many network testers reported feeling that mechanics were heavily influenced from the Battle Royale, including an enclosing ring to apply pressure on players to move fast and decisively. Now, while all of these details were obviously totally acceptable, after all, it was a positive outcome to see FromSoftware doing what they do best, innovating with every new release, avoiding the looming threat of stagnation that comes for all game franchises eventually.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
There were some reported mechanics that caused a particular stir in the community. Firstly, the leveling system had been greatly reduced in complexity and scale. Individual skill points were now no longer allocated at sites of grace, FromSoft opting for a simple level up mechanic that increased the effectiveness of your character in a predetermined way to enhance the fluidity of the faster pace of the game. This then at the trade-off of the deep build crafting that FromSoft games were known for, meaning that build expression was largely limited to your choice of class and good RNG during your run. For some fans, this wasn't a great start. The second was that network testers noted a lack of meta progression from run to run. For those unfamiliar with roguelites, the end of a run typically leaves you with improvements to your character that give you a better chance of going further on the next attempt. This wasn't shown in the network test outside of the relics that are awarded that provide an overarching modifier to gameplay in terms of things like direct buffs. However, a recent overview trailer released on the 2nd of May 2025 showed that a currency called Merc is awarded at the end of a run. This can either be used before a run to adjust your relics that buff your character at the round table hold via a mechanic called relic rights, or enable you to buy cosmetics to Lapis Solaire. I know which one I'd be choosing. But gamers didn't know this at the time, and the lack of a complete picture of the fundamental component of a roguelite cast doubt over the incentive to play the game if there was no form of progression or very little in the way of roguelike elements. FromSoftware games are deeply aspirational. Difficult bosses and a world to explore is always accompanied by the next greater challenge to overcome, and the euphoria when you do so. This aspirational component was also lacking without the complete game for network testers to explore. And I know what you're probably thinking, what about just playing the game for the pure feeling of fun? Well, fuck fun, this is gaming. Overall, the lukewarm reception that network testers felt for the game didn't really improve the hesitations that fans were starting to feel towards Nightreign, which heralded in a new wave of criticism for some of the game's design choices, which leads to the lore debate. Theory crafting and lore discussions are a staple of FromSoftware's community. With the ambiguity and complexity of each mainline game's narrative, there is always room for interpretation and discovery through each story. Some theories are good and some are bad. Elden Ring Nightreign raised quite the dilemma. Why were Dark Souls bosses appearing in Elden Ring? This occurrence warranted a very clear and satisfactory explanation. At least fans of the lore definitely felt that they were owed that. There's a few key bits of information that we know that offer some explanation. Firstly, the official Dark Souls Twitter account retweeted a trailer of Nightreign with the following quote: "In the night, ancestral foes await, remnants of a fire that once burnt bright." In typical Souls fashion, the statement is dripping in vagaries. This was either pure marketing or a statement by FromSoftware that Elden Ring and Dark Souls might share a universe. It is potentially a direct reference to the First Flame, suggesting that Elden Ring takes place in a time period after the Dark Souls trilogy. There are other pieces of evidence that have suggested this in the past, but they're somewhat speculative, so we'll omit those for another video or another time. The second and vastly more unsatisfactory piece of evidence is the statements made by the game's director, Junya Ishizaki. In an interview with GameSpot on February 12, 2025, Ishizaki made the following statement: "The primary reason for these existing bosses in Nightreign is from a gameplay perspective. We obviously understand that our players have a lot of affection for these characters and they have a lot of fond memories battling them in these games. So we didn't want to encroach too much on that lore aspect. We wanted them to make sense within the atmosphere and vibe of Elden Ring Nightreign, but it was more so from a numbers perspective. And just to add to that quickly, also from a personal standpoint, I thought it'd be kind of fun. So that's one simple reason why we included some of these old bosses." Now, this statement wasn't particularly well received. The fanbase dissatisfied with a straightforward game-focused provision for including older content. It was later clarified that fans should think of this as a spin-off, which again felt dismissive, with what felt like a fairly glaring fault in the game's construction, at least from a lore perspective. This explanation, in conjunction with Hidetaka Miyazaki, the famous luminary responsible for FromSoftware's history of titles, not directing the game, continued to raise eyebrows from fans, and interest was continuing to wane, at least for some of the fanbase. FromSoftware's foray into the world of multiplayer-centric games was also kind of perplexing from a fan perspective. The studio's legacy was built on the foundation of brutally difficult RPGs with complex stories and unique world building. With Nightreign ushering in a new era for the studio and the announcement of the Nintendo Switch 2's exclusive The Duskbloods, a battle royale style game with Bloodborne's signature gothic style, FromSoftware were making a pretty decisive statement that they were doubling down on multiplayer as a focus. Now, this this had not been a good decision for organizations like Sony, the vision of Concord's failure still incredibly clear in the minds of fans. Fans were a little divided on this decision. On the one hand, FromSoftware did have a history with multiplayer in both PvE and PvP, a small but dedicated community engaging with invasion PvP mechanics across their titles. However, it was never the focus, nor particularly a fully realized component of these games. It was like FromSoftware looked at their communities with staying power, boss rush challenges, and PvP players, and made 2 games to cash in on those activities. For cynical fans, Nightreign in particular looked like a cash grab with asset flips and borrowed mechanics. For less cynical fans, it was a studio reinventing itself, in much the same way that they had with every prior title. Either way, Nightreign was a new experiment, and fans were either believing in FromSoftware's brand of delivering to a very high quality with each new title, or they were jumping off the hype train, concerned with the direction that the studio was starting to take. Now, fans could pick and choose the reasons why they were hesitating about purchasing Nightreign, but it wasn't just any single one of these reasons, it was a collection. Underlying the genius of FromSoftware's games is the deeply unique world steeped in complex and indulgent lore, grotesque and at times beautifully elegant bosses, powerful enough to end you with a single blow, set pieces and vistas that take your breath away, and an epic journey that takes you from Rat Exterminator to Godslayer, which Elden Ring had in spades. And much of that awe that fans experienced on their first playthrough was now largely gone. The mystique and intrigue that pushed players further and further into the soul-destroying difficulty of these games was spent years before when the original game was launched. Even the brilliant Shadow of the Erdtree DLC had a new and somber world for players to explore and lose themselves within, and fans loved it. Almost too much. If you dislike it, unfortunately for you, you are maidenless plus skill issue. I erded all over my tree. Just collect some skibidi fragments and kill the Rizzler. Great DLC. According to my wife's boyfriend, this DLC will forever be remembered as the Dark Souls of Elden Rings. Never will getting wrecked by your enemies while your wife's boyfriend stares feels so satisfying. A true FromSoft classic. 10 out of 10. From what had been shown in marketing and playtests of Elden Ring Nightreign, there wasn't really enough sense of discovery to get excited about the way there had been in the past. Just the lands between again, but this time with some friends at your side. Would FromSoftware's brand and the legacy of Elden Ring be enough to make Nightreign a commercial success? Despite the many awkward philosophical concessions that fans needed to make for all the aforementioned reasons, Elden Ring Nightreign is undoubtedly going to be a commercial success, even simply due to the brand that it carries. Subsequently, fans believe so strongly in the spotless record of FromSoftware that it is firmly believed that Nightreign will be an enjoyable experience at the very least, and a stellar roguelite at the very best. The question really is, but for how long? And is the price tag worth the potential risk of disappointment? Elden Ring Nightreign's release is only days away. The age-old adage of wait until the game is in your hands before you judge being graffitied across a canvas of every forum and social media site in defense of the game. No matter your opinion, FromSoftware were confidently taking a major step forward in the world of multiplayer. Whether or not this decision was a good one remains to be seen. With May 30th looming, fans are poised to see if FromSoftware can maintain their glory run of well-regarded games or find themselves in a place they'd never been before, losing trust from their fans.